Under Tony's direction, a 2-week tour had been arranged for Ushi and me to explore the great deserts of Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Ushi wanted 2 quiet weeks in the wide open desert to heal the soul. Granting her wish was Fred's note of thanks to her for her help. My role was secondary. I was allowed to accompany her as her security escort. Of course, knowing Tony, I wasn't surprised that the entire Air Force contingent in the area knew of our arrival. Ushi's fame, based on her efforts in business, preceded her. In comparison, I was just a diplomat, someone doing his duty. Perhaps it had been under Tony's orders that nobody spoke about politics. Getting away from the political world had been the purpose of her holiday. In respecting her wishes, politics appeared to be a forbidden subject. We were treated like newlyweds instead, discreetly but affectionately. Maybe that's what Tony had told them that we were. We stayed in remote hotels at first in various parts of the desert of the Southwest. We even camped once. At midweek, a newlywed Air Force couple joined us. They came with a 4-seat helicopter at their disposal. With that, we could go wherever we wanted, and the couple knew all the best places. Ushi and I became a part of the family, so to speak, and apparently a part of the Air Force family as well. We were treated to life as it unfolded at the grassroots level, where the games are easy, unlike at the diplomatic level, and full of fun, and wide open for anything. At one of the parties that we were invited to, Kathleen, our newlywed bride, wanted to act out a fantasy. She confided to Ushi that the fantasy had come to her like a dark urge during her wedding party. "Why don't you act it out now, right here?" Ushi asked. Ushi might have imagined what this dark urge fantasy had been. With a grin on her face, she encouraged Kath to give herself that chance. Ushi must have felt it to be safe enough in this family environment to do something really daring. Everyone at the party had called her simply Kathy, or Kath, for short. Her full name, Kathleen, had never been used by anyone. She appeared to be family to them all, or someone closer. With a great smile on her face, when the music tape had come to an end that had provided the background music, Ushi stood up and said that she wanted to tell a story. She asked for help to clear a space in the middle of the room. A table had to be moved and chairs rearranged. She brought one of the children's high chairs from the kitchen and placed herself in the middle of the open space and told her story. Ushi told the story of a king. It was a king with a good heart who had received visitors from a faraway land. The visitors were not royalty, or philosophers, or priests. One was a poet, another a composer and performer of music, another was a man of science, and so forth. They were traveling together to explore the beauty that can be found in being human. Rumors had it that wherever they went, people became uplifted by their wisdom. So it was that they came before the king. The king was pleased with their performances, their stories, and their wisdom. A few days later, during the royal banquet, on the night before their departure to new destinations, the poet of the group asked the king if he was happy being isolated from his people by his wealth. The king answered that he wasn't at all happy about it, but that he was also unable to do anything to change that. He explained that if he gave away all of his possessions in order to be closer to his people, it wouldn't help many, and he would end up as poor as the rest of them, so that in the end nobody would be bettered. The poet agreed that this wasn't a workable solution. The musician, however, had an idea of how the problem might be solved. Both the poet and the man of science agreed that the composer's idea could work. The composer had been told during his travels that there lives a man in the king's realm that has an exceptional ear for music. He was also told that the man was poor and his musical instrument was of a poor quality. The composer suggested to the king that he should purchase a violin for that man. He described the violin as an instrument that sings the melodies of the heart. He told the king that such an instrument could be obtained in a foreign country at a price far above the means of a poor man. He also assured the king that the poor man could perform wonders with it, while the king could afford it easily, and should bestow it as a gift of love to him. The king protested. He protested, because if he did this, so he said, the lineup of beggars at his door would be endless. He was sure of it. The composer waved him off. He told the king that he should never present such a gift as a royal handout. If he did that, indeed, those problems would occur, but more than this, his gift would thereby become tarnished. A gift becomes tarnished if it is perceived as a means to bring the bearer of the gift calculated advantages, such as fame and honor. The composer suggested that the king should present the gift while being disguised as a traveler, as an ordinary man, and that he should bestow the gift in such a manner as would be necessary to assure the recipient that it is a gift of love, and nothing else. The composer said to the king that the gift would then not be tarnished. A gift is not tarnished if it can be accepted as a gift of love. Then it will shine. Bushi said that the king didn't like the idea at first, but as the days passed it seemed more and more right to him that he should do what his wise visitors had recommended. So he set out one day in disguise to visit the poor man. Indeed, everything that he had been told about the man was true. Consequently, a month later the king stood before the man again, in wayfarer's clothing, and bestowed on him his gift of love. It was by then a gift of love indeed, bestowed with all his heart and soul, as he had personally traveled to the far country that his visitors had spoken of, to obtain the precious instrument. The king was pleased with himself. In fact, he was so pleased that he repeated the process in many other ways. He also found out that other people were emulating him once the violinist began to enrich the lives of the people of the kingdom with his own gift of love, his music. It wasn't long after that a group of people in the kingdom banded together to construct a much-needed irrigation dam at the river that had been long desired. They constructed the dam as a gift of love to themselves. In this manner, as the king's pioneering venture caught on, the entire kingdom became enriched and uplifted. Naturally, the king was more than pleased with this development. However, soon a new problem developed. The problem was that the king's daughter had been inspired by her father's success and had wanted to extend it still further. Only, she had no riches to share. Still, she had seen that the people had become closer to one another by extending gifts of love to each other, although not close enough to love each other fully as human beings. She felt that, unless people began to really love one another for their humanity, they would remain forever divided, and that she herself would thereby remain forever isolated in the king's castle, as an outcast from society, an icon of a royalty for which society had little true affection. Thus she sneaked out of the castle one night, secretly in disguise, to the local inn, where she began to dance. She danced night after night in the nude, sharing not the king's riches, but herself, her own riches, as a human being. When the king found out about his daughter's adventures, since the people were beginning to realize who she was, he was wroth with her. The princess told her father that he was wrong to be angry. She told him that she had followed his own lead of removing what isolates people. She told him that if one takes away everything that is artificial, the whole of humanity would recognize itself as being one. She told her father that this outcome is inevitable because it is based on the truth, and that the inevitable can be realized at any time if one is willing to do what is necessary to acknowledge the truth. She told her father that she had seen an image in her mind of many people embracing one another in a dance powered by a great joy that was rooted in themselves. She told him that they had found their unity in their beauty as human beings and in their love for themselves that was blossoming into an outflowing love for one another. The king was not impressed by his daughter's logic. Nevertheless, his daughter convinced him over the space of the following months that she was right. The king became confronted with certain facts that he couldn't ignore because the people themselves continued the practice that the princess had started. It gradually brought a greater sense of family to his kingdom. People began to respect each other more and began to see each other more and more as human beings. They supported each other more. Soon, crime lessened, and the whole atmosphere in the kingdom became enriched. But most of all, the princess became regarded by the people as one of them. This breakthrough, the king could understand and appreciate. With the king's consent, therefore, the princess continued her dancing on occasions of her own choosing, arriving unannounced, as she had done before. At the end of the year, however, at the occasion of her own birthday celebration, the princess dared once more to take the process one big step further into the open. During the entertainment portion of her birthday celebration, she danced before the king herself, unembellished, as she was born, and before the king's ministers, before her guests, before the maids, and the butlers, and even before the boys that looked after the king's horses. Her dance became known, affectionately throughout the land, as the royal dance. It was said that her dancing didn't degrade the image of royalty, that it bestowed instead onto the people who saw her dancing a certain royalty of their own. Within seconds, after Rushi had finished telling the story, Kath got off her chair with a smile on her face, loaded the new tape into the music blaster, and started to dance the royal dance for her friends. She danced slowly at first, and, as she did, she began to take all of her clothes off to everyone's surprise. The surprise was justified, because the music wasn't designed for erotic dancing. She was dancing to the music of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake Ballet that made the scene magical, as well as beautiful and exciting. When the music ended, as if to explain her action, Kath stood in the middle of the room and said with a smile, "The woman of mankind is the bearer of the holy hill that has the light of the world placed upon it, that should not be hid. She is the cherished vestibule to heaven, the fabled horn of the boundless plenty of good, as all men surely agree deep in their heart." "This is the truth as far as I can tell," said Ushi in agreement. "Men love to be in heaven. Would anyone disagree?" Kat put another tape on as Ushi said this, and resumed her dancing without waiting for anyone to answer. The answer that Ushi had solicited came in the form of Kath's friends joining her dance. Kathleen's staring had made the party sparkle that day. Long before the music ended, many of Kath's friends had joined the dance. Her husband gave her a curious look at first and didn't seem pleased by it at all, but then, as the others joined in, he apparently changed his mind and suddenly joined the royal dancing himself. I overheard Kath saying to him while they were both dancing, "Why shouldn't we dance like this for one another and our friends, while we're still young? Pretty and exciting to look at. Why shouldn't we dance naked as we were born?" Her husband just smiled and nodded. Soon, everyone was dancing the royal dance, Bushi, and I included. Bushi asked Kathleen a while later, "Kath, I am curious, why had you wanted to do this at your wedding? What was your reason? Why did this idea come up as a fantasy?" She smiled at her and shrugged her shoulders. "I really don't know. You tell me if you can solve the puzzle. I suppose I simply wanted to do this because I was in love with myself. Does that sound so crazy to be unbelievable?" "That's what I thought you might say," said Ushi, and embraced her. "That's the best state that one can possibly be in, being in love with oneself as a human being." She added and kissed to her answer. "I can't say this honestly out of my own experience," said Ushi. "And don't ever let this being in love with yourself die in your heart, Kathy." Long after the royal dance story had been told, Kath's daring feat had been repeated by nearly all of her friends. It was all done in good fun, of course, and later even with the correct music. Eventually all the men got into the act too, not to be outdone by the ladies. With a chopper at our disposal, we had no need for hotels anymore. We camped in the most beautiful spots, miles from anywhere, surrounded at times by the great organ pipe cactuses of the desert, or by Joshua trees. Naturally, as we would awaken to greet the morning sun, we did so in the now royal fashion that Kath had established, naked as we were born, becoming enveloped by the still cool desert wind. Her husband, who was named Peter, like myself, loved the idea. In fact, he became quite excited about reverting back to something natural, as he had put it. Bushi told him that Kath's dance at the party had been in many ways like her own wedding dance. All of her closest friends had been present that day. She said that in her case the story was told by somebody else, a dear friend named Helen, who had hosted the wedding party and had danced the opening round of the royal dance herself. She told him that only the music had been different in her case. Helen had chosen to dance to the Nutcracker Suite. The music had made the dancing natural and beautiful, said Ushi with a grin. And there, too, long before the music had ended, most everyone had joined the dancing. She added a while later that the idea of the royalty of an individual has a beautiful and valid meaning when it is applied universally to humanity in honor of those profound, natural, human qualities that we all share. Kat's husband, Peter, wasn't surprised therefore against this background when Kath extended the trend that she had started one more time in her own pioneering spirit. We had stopped at a pub one evening on the way back to our camp. The pub had a reputation of being a lively place. It was a small place, but alive with laughter and music, a gathering place of friendly people. Once every hour, erotic dancers added to the atmosphere. They drew out the smiles with their festive kind of entertainment. They made people's eyes sparkle. That's when Kathy got her extended idea. The bartender agreed to inquire. Moments later, Kathy was introduced on the stage as the beautiful, the exotic, the out-of-this-world, the star of the morning. Our very own Kathleen, from our very own crowd. Give her a warm welcome, the announcer concluded. And Kath danced beautifully. But more than that, she set a trend into motion. Right after Kath had danced, she stood up and told the story behind the royal dance, and then she danced it herself. As soon as she was done, a beautiful man followed her lead, and after him a heavy-set woman. Even I made a contribution. It appeared that some of the men who had been there had called in their girlfriends. A few of the newcomers, too, dared the dance when an opportunity opened up for them to do so on their own accord. The rest who didn't simply joined the crowd. I got the impression that quite a few people fell more in love with themselves that day, and with one another, than they might have thought possible. She was later called upon to repeat the presentation of her story after a lot of new people had arrived and the place had become crowded. "Do you realize what is happening here?" I asked Tushi at one point. "I think the tectonic plates are moving. The sea change that Steve has been talking about has begun. The royal dance story is really the story of the sea change from greed-based fascism to love-based economics. It's an expression of the principle of universal love," said Ushi. "It's an expression of the natural unfolding of Helen's lateral lattice of hearts. Its universal unfolding has been delayed for much too long. When Helen was moved by a sense of great urgency to help her friend in hospital, who was undergoing a major operation, she had brought together all that she knew about human existence. I think she told you about it, didn't she? She saw a visual construct unfolding in her mind in response to her sensing a great crisis in the making. In response, she saw before her a visual construct of the vast lattice of human hearts, all arrayed laterally side by side, of which her friend's heart was one. In this visual construct she beheld the principle of universal love in operation. She observed, like a spectator might, that the lattice was held together by countless strands of love that appeared like channels of light through which each of the hearts in the lattice contributed a bit of its strength to the heart in need. Helen beheld this process in action at 3 different times throughout the time frame of the surgery. In the end, a great peace came over her. And as you know, the biggest surprise awaited her later that afternoon when she visited her friend in hospital. She found him sitting up in bed with a radiant smile, a smile powered by a great joy, as if a profound victory had been won. What she saw totally defied what one would expect to see from a person having come out of surgery just hours earlier that took all morning to be performed. "I can't see similar expressions of joy erupting here tonight," said Ushi. "I had no idea that the principle of the lateral lattice could unfold so simply and in an everyday type context, and so beautifully," I commented with a smile of my own. "And so powerfully," added Ushi with a nod. "But is it truly a human power that is at work here?" I said quietly, "or is it not something greater?" A discovery of the great Apostle John comes to mind here, who said, "The God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him." If this is so, then the strands of light that Helen saw pervading the lateral lattice are strands of love, but they are also divine strands, a force from the spiritual background of our world that we simply tap into, which comes to light in our life as love. The fact is, Bushi, we don't create love, we simply live it. It's a part of us. The evidence for this is that something greater is found wherever love does come to light. It adds something profound, something that sparkles with joy, as we see it right here. The Apostle John even suggests that by not having love in our life, we have no evidence of God. Some scholars suggest that the discovery that God is love was made by the same person named John, who wrote the book of Revelation, said Ushi. He describes in Revelation a woman clothed with the sun, representing humanity. Helen had mentioned this metaphor many times to me, of the woman clothed with the sun, in the profound and spiritual sense. She thinks that her perception of the lateral lattice might be rooted in that image of mankind being arrayed with the sun, such as being alive in universal love. Helen also thinks that from this root unfolded her idea of the royal dance, the dance that we have unfolding right here, which truly is a dance of love, the love in which God comes to light. She grinned from ear to ear as she said this, and added something about this pub being a rare temple of love, and thus a greater edifice to the name of God than any church she knew. I wish that perfidious Albion could see this, I said to her with a big grin, the wicked kind of grin. Perfidious Albion, who lives in perpetual darkness, would be blinded by this light, but might find a new life in it. No, he would get a heart attack, and die, she replied with a grin too. What is happening here has not been done on such a platform, and on such a scale, since time began. Perfidious Albion would have a heart attack indeed, out of fear that the age of love is dawning. I shook my head. I think this is impossible, I mean for him to have a heart attack. Perfidious Albion has no heart. Still, I think that just seeing all this would certainly scare him to death. Maybe that's the solution, she replied, and grinned again. Perfidious who? Kot's husband, Peter interjected. Albion, I replied. That's an ancient name for the English islands that happen to be also the operational center of the largest private empire ever created on the face of the earth. This private empire is presently at war with humanity. I turned to Kathleen. You, Kath, may have just invented a trend that can save us and our entire human civilization from the inhuman monsters of the Fonda's empire. Peter started to laugh out loud. Our Kath, you say? I nodded to him. Yes, my friend, and I am serious about that. Be proud of her. She has unearthed something that is deeply human. Peter raised his glass to Kath. She was talking to somebody else at the time. Did you hear that, Kath? He said in a loud tone. Your dancing might have the potential to save the world. Kathy became quite famous that night. She was appropriately introduced the next time she danced as the Queen of the Nile, who holds in her soul the doom of empires and the light of humanity and civilization. Everyone cheered for her. Ultimately, though, it was probably Ushi that made the event most memorable for everyone there. Ushi came onto the stage one last time. This time she came dressed in dirty rags and quickly shed them. Moments later she stopped the dancing and signaled the music to stop. She sat on a chair that she had brought up onto the stage and began to tell another story, a double story. She said that the double story was both sad and profound, a story about our civilization. She began with the story of Prometheus, bound from an ancient Greek drama. Prometheus was a god in love with mankind who was being persecuted for this love by the imperial gods of Olympus. Since Prometheus couldn't be killed being a god, he could nevertheless be punished by the Olympians, who ganged up on him and claimed to have power over him. Thus he was subjected to eternal torture by the Olympians. And so he was punished in their rage of revenge. They ganged up on him and bound him and tied him to a rock and ordered a bird of prey to continuously peck out the liver of his living body. In the endless pain of being tortured, Prometheus was still able to laugh at the Olympians, because as told them, he knew the secret of their inevitable demise. Being afraid now themselves, the Olympians offered him a chance to be set free if he revealed his secret to them. However, he couldn't comply, as this would involve his betraying of his love for humanity. He wasn't prepared to make the sacrifice. Thus, instead of pleading with the Olympians and begging them for mercy, he simply laughed at them. He told them in his laughter that whatever pain they could dish out, he could bear forever, because the pain was small in comparison with the profundity of his love and its boundless wonders. He also told them that they thereby proved that they had no power over him at all, which also proved that they had no claim to be called gods. Thus, he won his freedom without a sacrifice. I guess the playwright wanted society to ask itself if it had the same kind of love for one another that supersedes everything, said Ushi. Then she told her second story, which she said was from the same neck of the woods, but from a slightly later time. She said that the writer of the second story was a writer of prophecy. He had a vision, and in this vision he beheld a woman. The woman that he beheld was naked, but being naked she appeared him as clothed with the sun. She stood upon the moon with her head held high that was crowned with a crown of 12 stars, the stars of rejoicing. Both of these stories are stories about love, said Ushi. The royal dance story was modeled after both of these two stories, because my friend Helen found those two stories reflected in her life. She found herself many times in the position of Prometheus, when she was challenged to denounce her love of mankind by the demands of small-minded thinking. She always stood her ground just as Prometheus did. She stood her ground for her higher vision of mankind that few shared, and that most of the modern gods of Olympus denied. She proved them likewise to have no power, really, and no legitimacy, because she saw herself and all others as arrayed with the sun, and as having their universe under her feet, and on her head a crown of rejoicing that no one could take away. Thus, her life became the royal dance. It became a light for many. She paused and smiled. Helen always had a profound answer ready for the gods of Olympus when they raised their ugly head, said Ushi. Helen's answer always was, to whatever problem came her way, what has the problem got to do with anything? Does it change the principle involved? The principle that she referred to is the principle of universal love, the principle of the woman clothed with the sun, the Prometheus's principle, and Helen's principle, which I have also made my own, said Ushi. The principle of universal love is also the principle of the royal dance. Ushi received a standing ovation that night. The whole crowd was instantly on its feet. At that moment she signaled the music man, and when the music started again she continued to dance while everyone remained standing and clapped in the rhythm of the music of her dancing. Peter and Kath took us to Vegas the next day for the sparkling lights, the swimming pools, the fine restaurants, and cabarets. She loved the service at the hotel, the doorman opening the doors for her, the bouquet of flowers in the room, the bowl of fruits and nuts that she found set up there for a welcome present. Still, Vegas appeared somewhat dull in comparison with what we had left behind. The lights of Vegas didn't measure up to the warmth and the excitement of our own shows. The sparkling lights of Vegas were no match for the sparkle in the people's eyes in the desert. After Vegas, Peter and Kath took us to Tampa. That's where the helicopter had been borrowed. In Tampa we joined hands for another day and 2 nights of extravaganzas of the most extraordinary rides, the Scream Machine, giant carousels, the corkscrew, Satan's tracks, tumbleweed, jungle drop parachute rides, and the world's biggest water slides in the biggest water park in existence. Then, when the end came, time to say goodbye, one more giant surprise awaited us all. This time even Peter and Kath were surprised. "We've got a 4-day extension," said Peter after he had checked in with his home base. "And the reason for the extension is?" I asked. "We have been offered a ride to Athens and back," said Peter. "It's all free. Arranged by some general from on high that I never heard of. We'll be flying with the 908th Airlift Wing from Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. We are going to be guests on the C-141, all 4 of us. Athens sounds exciting, said Ushi. I can hardly believe it. We are really going to Athens? Said Ushi as we climbed up the steep crew ramp to a fully loaded C-141. The plane stood in the morning fog, ready to roll onto the runway at Maxwell Base. The sun was barely breaking through. Fog filled the entire airbase. Welcome to the C-141 Starlifter, said the captain, as we came aboard. This airplane is the last in a long line of heavy transport aircraft, and the finest ever built. We have unlimited global reach, as the only heavy transport in the world that is built with in-flight refueling capability. This aircraft is a part of our country's proud tradition of absolute air superiority, a tradition that makes the United States Air Force unchallenged in the world. I always wanted to stand on the Acropolis, said Ushi, as if she hadn't heard a word. You will find the modern world of Athens more exciting than this dusty site of ancient relics, said the captain, who had evidently expected a different response. The Athens of the Parthenon is the Athens of Pericles, the Athens of Empire, the Athens of the Peloponnesian War, said I to the loadmaster in support of the captain. The loadmaster was taking his seat behind us, getting ready for takeoff. That's precisely why I brought the Acropolis up, said Ushi to the loadmaster, then turned her head to the captain. I brought the Acropolis up, my friend, because you speak exactly like Pericles did. Pericles had built the Parthenon and other great works on the Acropolis, but he also launched the Peloponnesian War. To Pericles, Athena was superior to anything in the world. This imperial dream of superiority over everything became the root for the eventual defeat of Athens. The arrogance of Pericles became its downfall. So, my friend, why do you strive for air superiority? Why do you strive for superiority at all? Pericles never saw the total defeat of Athens. He died in the war that he created. Be careful, therefore, my friend, about wanting to be superior. Are we not all human beings right across the world? Why should any of us strive for superiority over another? Don't worry, we will search for the real Athenians, I interjected since the captain didn't care to answer. We'll look for the Athens of Solon, Socrates, and Plato, and of Aeschylus, the Athenian tragic dramatist, the author of Prometheus Bound, I said to the captain. Helen would love that, said Ushi. Do they still perform Aeschylus and the Prometheus Bound tragedy? Maybe they do in back alley theaters for the tourists, said the captain. What interests me more is the puzzle that you guys are. I can't understand what is happening here. Which one of you knows General Tony? General Tony? I repeated and began to laugh. Did General Tony arrange our passage to Athens? He ordered it, apparently on recommendation of General Dag, said the captain. And who on earth is General Dag? You don't know who they are? I said, as if this was a joke. Those 2 generals are the heroes of the century, and the reason why you and I are still alive today, I replied. Less than 4 weeks ago, a Russian cruise missile was launched against the United States from a vessel off the coast of North Carolina. General Tony witnessed the incidents and immediately assumed command to have the thing brought down. He went right over the head of everybody to save time. Within seconds he had contacted General Dag at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. General Dag immediately diverted all aircraft in the area to search for the cruise missile and to confirm the projected flight path. At the same time, General Dag alerted Langley Air Force Base to mobilize the 1st and 307th Combat Wing. By the time the cruise missile was in range, they had 3 AWACS in the air. A pilot from the 307th brought the thing down just outside of Arlington. The captain's face became pale momentarily. My parents live in Washington, D.C., he said quietly. The cruise wasn't meant for Washington, I said. The target was Baltimore. I have it from the horse's mouth. Baltimore was the target. The plan was to fly this thing right across Washington, right under our nose, totally undetected across the most monitored airspace in the world and take out Baltimore. That would have caused hysteria and fear, on a scale that you cannot imagine, enough to justify blowing up half of the world. That was the plan. General Tony and General Dag spoiled the whole thing. "You are pulling our leg," said the flight engineer. "Not a sparrow enters the United States airspace undetected, much less near the Norfolk Naval Base, the largest naval base in the world. And getting to Washington, that's totally impossible. You are talking about the most heavily defended airspace on the planet." "That's true, until the defenses are shut down from within," I interjected. "In any case, it happened. As I said, the plan was to fly across Washington, D.C., probably detected so late that it would leave no room for anyone to react. That's real history. It happened 4 weeks ago. Baltimore was the target, and to fly this thing right across Washington, D.C. was the plan. It's all been confirmed out of the horse's mouth." Tony and Dag threw a monkey wrench into the works. "Tony was with me when the thing flew practically over the house of a naval tracking station in North Carolina. Not a trace of the missile was recorded by any sensor. Tony is a long-time airman. He took charge of the situation immediately, like any patriotic general would, and he did fire up Dagmar and demanded that she too act like a general. That's how one has to act when the situation is critical. Dag is the night shift communications officer at Johnson Air Force Base, Tony's sweetheart, and the rest happened, as I have told you. The Soviets had actually very little to do with that. I've been grilled for over 5 hours by the Fondi in Venice. The Fondi had planned this, and they didn't take kindly to us spoiling their plan." The captain just shook his head in disbelief. "The real hero is Ushi," I assured him. "Ushi was my contact for a prisoner exchange in East Germany. I work for the diplomatic service. Because of Ushi I met Tony, and the two of us had this crazy idea of launching a nudist beach project, a kind of university on the beach. So we bought a bit of beachfront, far out of the way. That's where we met Ross, the naval observer. We had dinner at his place. That night, just as a big storm was blowing in, I noticed a fishing boat that seemed to be in trouble. But it wasn't a fishing boat. It was a Russian spy ship. With Ross equipment we were able to observe the ship taking on cargo from 2 submarines, 3 long-end slander crates. Minutes later a fire erupted that blinded Ross equipment. Nevertheless we did see the cruise missile emerge from the smoke. It looked like it was going to hit the house. That's when General Tony and General Dag entered the scene. The cruise was brought down just outside Arlington because of their immediate intervention. In times like these everyone is the general in charge. One simply does what is necessary to save the country. The consequences can be dealt with later. Tony acted like a human being should. He was brilliant. He was clothed with the sun indeed. He had cut right through the command chain. Had he not done what he did, and bypassed all the normal channels, the escalation in the chain of command would have stopped at the broken link where the defenses were shut down. Tony bypassed all of that. He let his light shine and saved the world. "And your part in that was?" asked the captain and shook his head again. "My part was that I saw the fishing boat," I replied. "If I hadn't seen it, nobody would have noticed anything. And that little thing, my friend, was caused by a chain of events that Ushi had started months earlier. So you see, we little people sometimes have the power to change the world, and sometimes we even make good on that." "Do you really expect me to believe that?" said the captain. "Why would I expect you to believe anything?" said I. "It's not my job to make you believe a single thing. It's my job to tell you the truth. In any case, I left the really unbelievable parts untold, like Ushi's fantastic story of the royal dance. Now you want me to tell you?" "Oh, I can't imagine what this is all about," said the captain. "I think you told us enough," said the flight engineer, and laughed. "If General Tony and General Dag aren't the world champions of the royal dance, who is?" The engineer had a good chuckle over that revelation. "Right, Malcolm, said the captain and shook his head again, and grinned. That just about sums it up, doesn't it? At this point we had crossed the Atlantic coastline. Athens seemed still infinitely far away, too far for such an atmosphere to be left unhealed. The flight engineer tried to change the subject to make us more comfortable. He said something about us being guests. "Oh, come on, Malcolm, we've been had by a bunch of con artists," said the captain. "We've been given the royal dance to give these bums a free ride. It happens in the military too, you know. The world is full of them. Why should the military be spared the pain?" His tone changed when the loadmaster handed the captain a magazine. "This is Lieutenant Dagmar Ferris, at her decoration ceremony 3 weeks ago," he said to the captain. "Didn't you tell me some time ago that you have family in Baltimore, Jack?" he added. "If I'm not mistaken, you have a brother living there. I would suggest to you that you write this Lieutenant Dagmar Ferris a nice thank you note." I invited Peter and Kath to our beach when we said goodbye to each other 4 days later after our return to Maxwell Base. I told them to come whenever they felt like coming or needed to get away. I also extended the same offer to the captain and the crew. "I am always there," I said to them, "unless I find myself once again in the belly of Puff the Magic Dragon on yet another quest to defeat the monster of the underworld." The captain understood the metaphor. Peter and Kath promised to look us up when we saw the off on their flight home. We wished each other well in parting. And not with sad faces, but with happy tears in our eyes. We were happy for having shared this time together. On the commercial flight back to Washington, as if a light had been lit, I began to understand something about the deeply rooted significance of Helen's royal dance. I realized that this dance had also been Tara's dance, that she had danced so beautifully in Suchumi, for us all, and had done so daily for 2 entire weeks. Hers had been a royal dance, indeed, though in a slightly different form, but just as beautiful. I remembered again what Steve had said about Pandora's box, that one has to deal with everything that's in it. I suddenly realized how much I had misunderstood Tara's dance. I had seen my affairs with Tara and Suchumi, and with Olive too, in isolation from the larger world, as if the world was divided into occasions and scenes with categorical differences. I realized suddenly that this division was invalid. No principle supported it. Each one of the people that I had met and had danced the royal dance with turned out to be a precious gem in his and her own way, a gem of a wonderful world that we all share together. The love of those people that all had danced the royal dance had been unimpaired by the dictates of the countless forms of conventions that stood like iron curtains. But we had all stepped across them and had danced in our own way, that one universal dance that unites us like so many grains of sand blowing on the seashore, that each is a part of. And so it was that Tushi's dance, and her love, and Erica's, and Sylvia's, and Steve's, and Tony's, and Ross, and Fred's, and mine, came to light as being all interlocked. We were all dancing in our own way, but we were all dancing the one royal dance. In that we were united by our love for the humanity that we all share in our hearts, and will continue so forever. I asked Tusi if she felt the same way. She simply smiled, and asked me in return why it took me so long to discover that. On the plane back to our rock by the sea, the inevitable question surfaced. Did we do the right thing? When one opens Pandora's box, one has to deal with what comes out of it. We had opened Pandora's box in a big way with the royal dance. We had dug deeper than ever before, but did we deal intelligently with what came out of it? Did we elevate it? Did we turn the scene into something rich? Did we turn the emptiness that is so often attached to nudity into something rich that brought to light the naked royalty of the human being as something beautiful to behold and worthy to be honored? I asked myself many such questions on the way home. It seemed that the answers had not yet been developed. What comes out of Pandora's box can take us in 3 different directions, I suggested to Ushi when we began to explore the subject. If nudity entices lust, it needs to be avoided, because lust is slavery. We didn't find any of that at the nudist beach in Leipzig, did we? If, on the other hand, nudity inspires honesty with ourselves, it needs to be welcomed, because this honesty has the tendency to dissolve our self-isolation. We experience the power of that ourselves, I said. It was the key element that brought us so amazingly close to each other on the first day we met on the beach in Leipzig. Nudity can also inspire a feeling of nakedness, which immediately causes one to cover things up, and this leads to self-denial. Obviously, the Palmerston-type crowd in ancient times has done its utmost to make humanity ashamed of itself by blinding it to the riches of its own beauty, and with it its inner beauty, and so demanded to cover it all up. That self-denial. Maybe that is what nude dancing is in protest against. Unfortunately, protesting doesn't solve anything, does it? We need to focus on the active principle that brings out what is real. Protesting is an invalid pursuit because it doesn't elevate anything. It doesn't enrich society. However, do we really know what this active principle is that elevates society? We call it the principle of universal love. That's a wide concept, Bushi. But what does it mean in everyday living? It seems that we have explored only a tiny bit of it. That is why the human journey is a spiritual journey of discoveries, said Ushi. But don't forget, Peter, if we take our clothes off, we are naked. We are as naked and as rich as when we were born. The active principle here is the principle of Helen's lateral lattice, where we all stand side by side, bound to each other with strands of love. John the Revelator saw in those strands the image of the sun. He saw us enveloped with this sunshine of the strands of love, and he gave the sunshine the name of God. He said flatly, if you can't see love, you can't see God, for love is God's expression. Some say that this perception belittles God. It makes God dependent on mankind. I would answer to that it ennobles mankind as the very expression of what God is. In fact, it is the pinnacle of the creative intelligence of the universe. One can't go beyond it. One can step up to higher ground. And that's what love is, isn't it? It isn't something that we create at will. It just is. We can only open ourselves up to its flow. Nor can we actually see it, touch it, measure it, and bottle it into cans, and save it for a rainy day. But we can feel its effect and are uplifted by it. We also know that when we close our eyes and heart to it, our world becomes dark and our civilization disintegrates. Thus, the trick is to open our eyes ever wider and to search for the principle of it. Helen suggests that the principle of love is illustrated in her visual construct of the lateral lattice, where everyone is standing side by side universally, not above, not below, but side by side. She suggests that her lateral lattice construct is a visual celebration of the principle of love. She suggests that this might be the reason why it had such a profoundly healing effect on her friend. She also suggests that the royal dance is another form of acknowledging the lateral lattice reality. Helen sees it as a conscious celebration of it, and she suggests that it should have an equally profound healing effect in the social domain. Love makes us as rich today as we were born, as human beings, I replied. That's something we can't treasure ourselves for, as the brightest stars in the universe of life, said Ushi. We are not human cattle or glorified monkeys. We are infinitely greater. We are greater even than what is reflected in the grandest symphony of Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Brahms, and so forth. And those are just some of the gems of our humanity. They are gems of a profound mind, and a profound love. Isn't that to some degree what the metaphor signifies of the woman clothed with the sun? I interjected. Don't forget, as human beings we have also discovered the ability to move beyond that, and to make ourselves appear more beautiful with the riches of our mind, said Ushi. Clothing is an element of culture, of intelligent development, of art, grace, and beauty. We have achieved in our development of culture what no other species of life has come even close to. Clothing then becomes not an embellishment, but an expression that reflects the riches of our grace. That's a uniquely human quality that we should be proud of and are. However, we should also recognize and value ourselves as beautiful and complete just the way we are, and keep in mind our place in the lateral lattice of love, without which everything else becomes lost. The proof of that is found in the simple fact that science, music, art, technology, poetry, literature, language, and so on, together with all the other grand things that make us human, are complete within us. As we were born, said I, we appear to be stars even in our nakedness, stars clothed with the sun. Everything that enriches our world and ourselves is drawn from what we are, said Ushi. Our highest form of education will never add to what we already are, but help us develop it and bring it out in ever brighter ways, so that its light becomes the light of the world. Without it we dwell in darkness, and the dark ages might begin anew. But if we move with it, the unfolding light becomes the light of Renaissance, in which we can face the coming ice age, and say to it with laughter, "Where is thy sting?" That is how I see the potential of love. I also see the royal dance to have a profound impact on the development of that love. Maybe that is what Helen means when she expects the royal dance to have a profound healing effect. Am I dreaming in saying that? I nodded, smiled, but then shook my head. It's the same with culture, like art, music, literature, poetry, clothing, and so forth, said Ushi. They do not add to our humanity or supersede what we are, but bring to light the sunshine of our humanity, in which we are rich, which inspires a flow of celebration. I would say that we might be moving towards this more rapidly than we give ourselves credit for, I said to her. In countless different ways our clothing has become more open than it has ever been before, and more sexy, and more daring and provocative. It actually emphasizes what our brutish sense would hide. But that also reflects a certain dishonesty with ourselves. We are highlighting an element of our humanity that we proclaim that we don't want to look at. Boo, she laughed. We hide it and emphasize it at the same time. That's silly. However, is this shift in focus breaking the isolation between one another that had been built up over time by sterile imposed conventions? I shrugged my shoulders. Maybe someday we'll find ourselves inspired to put our smallness aside and see ourselves as the grand and beautiful beings that we are, without needing embellishments, and in a celebration that inspires us to dance a kind of native dance. We shouldn't call this naked dancing then, but native dancing, said Ushi. Maybe the whole nakedness thing is nothing more than sophistry carried on for thousands of years to make us look small and ashamed of ourselves. We should break the sophistry and redefine nakedness as nativeness, I said, and laughed. It would certainly change the way we regard one another. This means that the active principle of truthfulness gives us the freedom to develop our self-love, our love for our humanity, that we all share, and by which we are united as a single humanity. That's culture too, and on a much higher level than the culture of covering things up. Why shouldn't the native dancer then stand proudly in front of the whole world and say, "Here I am a beautiful human being, I am worthy to be admired with or without embellishments. I am complete, profound, serene, sovereign, sublime. I don't want to steal from your self-perception by being called naked, but enrich your love of your humanity at its full native worth." The fact is, Peter, people do respond to the self-love and this spiritual honesty. They enjoy it without knowing why. They came from miles away in the desert, and they came just for that, as they have come together for the same attraction in many other places around the world, and will likely always do that. They came in droves to the pub in the desert, and filled the place to the brim. The royal dance brings out our royalty as human beings, if we can see it as that. It seems to touch a responsive chord deep in people's soul that creates a sense of unity. I suspect also that this sense of unity will somehow spill over into the larger world and grow in profundity. Maybe this is what the creators of lies had aimed to prevent, I said. It seems to me that the biblical Adam mythology is a political statement of a courageous dramatist of satire. It speaks of forbidden knowledge. That's a perfect metaphor for the political lie. The lie shines like a jewel, but it will kill you. The first effect that Adam discovered is that it renders the royal dance as being immoral and shameful. Then, as the story goes, with this first step into the sewer of lies established, the whole scene disintegrates into chaos and utter poverty. It seems to me that the political writer that created this Adam satire had discovered an engineered process that is powerfully destructive to civilization. It remains so to the present day. The writer was saying to society, "Open your eyes." But no one responded, or wasn't allowed to. The reality pertaining to any lie is found in the opposite of it, said Ushi. Doing the opposite of what the lie proclaims appears to be the most honest and open thing to do, and the most leading-edge process to pursue. Maybe the erotic dancer doesn't really dance in protest, but dances to fulfill the law of truth as the royal dance is designed? That's an interesting thought, Ushi replied. I had hoped to find some evidence for the royal dance in Athens, I said to Ushi. If it is based on truth, it must have had manifests also in the ancient world. But I didn't see anything. I think the sophistry was already established before the time of Athens, said Ushi. The Adam satire might have come from that area, however. It uncovers the sophistry that may have been developed in the early dynastic age. The sophistry is hard to beat. The Adam man is portrayed as made of dust, and the woman of a stolen body part taken from the man made of dust. And the dust creature is further degraded by seduction centered on lies and conspiracies. Mankind seeking truth, the forbidden knowledge in any empire, is immediately punished. The human image becomes torn to the ground to the point that mankind, the tallest of creation, is no longer deemed worthy to live in its native environment. Mankind becomes an outcast. Unfortunately, the satire was twisted into becoming regarded as the truth. It appears that the Prometheus story was an attempt to help mankind to dig itself out of this ancient trap that is really a form of religious terrorism. The terror is often hidden, I suggested. The world is full of politically forbidden knowledge that one must never talk about. Don't talk about conspiracies. Don't talk about truth. Humanity is not allowed to explore reality, to discover what isn't approved, to recognize fundamental principles that stand in contradiction to empire as a form of government, and to develop knowledge and understanding, whereby society would become free and become capable of developing their universe, and to scrap the notion of empire. Don't open your eyes. Knowledge is forbidden. Adam disobeys the strangulation doctrine, and is banished, first by himself, then by God. It appears to me that Helen's royal dance stands at the forefront of the breakout of mankind from the ancient mental terrorism of self-condemnation into human freedom. While the Adam story of mental terrorism may have been originally written as a satire to make people think, the ruling imperials seemed to have latched onto the satire and turned it into a truth that became religious teaching for thousands of years. The perversion of the truth has thereby become deeply ingrained in society's axioms. Ushi nodded and smiled. I suggested to Ushi that this political creation story, imposing mental terror, has been so skillfully crafted into a profound truth that if it weren't so ancient, one would suspect it to have originated in one of the modern leading psychological warfare institutes. But then, suddenly somebody disobeys. The clouds break overhead, and the dancer stands up, native as the person was born, and proclaims, "Here I am beautiful, and I understand that I am the tallest creation in the universe." What the dancer thereby really does, perhaps without being aware of it, is actually far more profound than we may think, I said to Ushi. The dancer then doesn't shed her clothes primarily. The dancer stands up and sheds the ancient sophistry of mental terrorism. That is what really happens, and of course, it's scary to do this. It is scary, because the terrorizing axioms condemn the dancer and call that person shameless, which is actually true, because shame is one of the impositions of the ancient mental terror. If this shame isn't overcome, the entrapment goes deeper. The man in the Adam story is presented as the deceiver of the woman, and the woman is presented as one who is weak, who doesn't stand up for herself. Finally, when the whole mess comes to a head, The terrorized man denies himself. He denounces his own conscience and puts the blame on the snake. Hey, God, ruler of empire, it wasn't my impulse to seek knowledge and to seek truth. The lowest form of life urged me to do that, contrary to your command. After all, the human being is an animal, is he not? The man in the satire didn't say this, but he was supposed to think it and feel it. What a trip, Bushi. So, the self-denial that eliminates any sense of truth deepens the human division further and further. As a result, the man and the woman are both expelled from the garden of creation, condemned to scrape a living from the dust of the ground. What else can this totally denounced man and woman do, that have been forcibly denied access to knowledge and understanding, and whose sense of discovery and self-discovery, the very nature and capacity of the human mind that makes us human, has been trashed and ridiculed at the very outset? This is how the rulers of empires wanted humanity to see itself, divided, impoverished, and ashamed of itself, with no legitimate need for intellectual development, a mindless mass of toiling slaves, easy to rule and to exploit. But when we danced our native dance, I continued, all this became overruled. Everyone felt closer to one another. There was a sense of joy and unity and honesty. We really touched on something that was rooted in the sublime. One could see it in people's faces. This means we need to recognize that the scripts for mental terrorism in the scriptures were written by the servants of empires rather than by honest theologians and historians, since the ruling imperials are still playing this tune, especially the tune of small-minded thinking interlaced with terrorism. If one looks at today's world with an open mind, it becomes immediately apparent that the imperials of the world demand absolute obedience to the politically created farce that inspires people to feel small and ashamed of themselves and thereby shun their scientific and spiritual potential and block their self-development, even their nature as spiritual beings. Thus we bow to deindustrialization, to poverty, to smallness, to impotence, and even to the notion that man is a cancer on the earth. The imperials continue to demand that people become obedient to the farcical rules that they have designed to isolate and degrade humanity into being ashamed of itself and thereby to accept the divisions of mankind as the norm. We have always known that in countless different ways, haven't we? Bushi replied. That's why we have danced for our humanity. That's why we have all danced together in the desert. It only took a spark to ignite the fire. I suggested that this confirms that there is but one single truth threaded through all aspects of human existence, a thread that unites us all as one.